Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. On today's episode, I'm debriefing a dear friend, co-host, and industry thought leader as he returns from a big international event. That's right, the Global Upstate Conference on International Business and Foreign Affairs was held this week, and it was presented by the World Affairs Council Upstate and hosted by our friends at Furman University, home of the Paladins, and the University of South Carolina Upstate, which I'm going to have to look up their nickname. But we're going to dive right in. I want to welcome in, of course, our featured guest. You know him well by now, Mr. Greg White, my co-host of Supply Chain Now, where he serves as Chief Industry Adjutant and is constantly challenging the status quo. Gregory, how we doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's funny you mentioned that. Somebody walked up to me and said, at the conference and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to speak to my group. You're a disruptor." And I went, "Whoa, is it that obvious?"
I love that. They know you well.
Yeah, as soon as I open my mouth, I guess.
So I am looking up the USC Upstate mascot.
Yeah.
And that is going to be let's see here. I don't see a mascot.
Well, they're a branch campus, so they may not have
Spartans.
Oh, they are
see on
Spartans.
T-shirts. USC
Okay.
Upstate Spartans, Greg.
So basically the Spartanburg Spartans, because that's where USC Upstate is located.
That is right, man.
Yeah.
It's trivia. So folks, you're going to be asked at some point in some really cool hole-in-the-wall bar as you're playing trivia one day, hey, who knows for $100, who knows the mascot of the USC Upstate University? Spartans. There's your answer. So, hey, big thanks
Always
to Greg.
bringing value.
That's right. So, before we get into the key takeaways, we've heard a lot of feedback already. I couldn't make the conference, but you, and of course, your partner in crime, at least for this past week, Kevin L. Jackson, which hosts our Digital Transformer series here at Supply Chain Now, who Greg is helping to power more transformational tomorrows. You and Kevin were a hit, Greg.
I guess so. I mean, I think, Kevin's, for everyone who knows us, they must know Kevin's bio by now. But when you hear it pronounced in the physical presence of Kevin, and it is so very impressive. The Naval Academy, 3 degrees, worked with military, foreign governments, NASA. Our government, right? He's an adjunct professor, all sorts of things that are just so impressive. And his points of view are really, really powerful. So I got to experience that firsthand on a couple of different panels where we were both on.
Now, Kevin has sent me a wire. He says that I cannot ask you anything about your time together. There was evidently some top secret activities. So we'll circle back on a future Buzz edition. But I do, Greg, before we get into key takeaways.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much time you spent there in the upstate of South Carolina, which listeners, if you think of Clemson and Greenville and Spartanburg, kind of that northeastern portion of South Carolina is generally referred to as the upstate. So, Greg, any observations, the food, the people, the landscape?
All of it. First of all, it's 12 counties in kind of the northern section of South Carolina that they consider the upstate. I did notice and observe that everyone was like, "What do they call the rest of it?" I said, I know they call some of it the Low Country,
right?
But I'm not sure there's actually a formal term for downstate or other parts.
The Midlands.
Of the state.
The Midlands.
The Midlands. Oh, that's right. You're a South Carolina native, so you know these things.
From Aiken, one of the 46 counties that make up South Carolina. But you know what, Greg? I messed up. I said northeast. It is a northwest corner.
Yeah.
of South Carolina. So not
Well,
to
it's
confuse
strange
people.
because of South Carolina's shape. It's almost all corners, right? It's effectively a triangle with a round
Right.
top. But yeah,
So
and it was beautiful. And actually, I have been to Furman University before. Actually, I've been to Greenville and Spartanburg before. You know, I'm a big BMW fan, and they
that's
have a
right.
driving experience up there. But I'm also I'm also a Wichita State fan, and the last time Wichita State was in the NCAA tournament, we played the University of Clemson. Sorry, we whooped them at Furman University. So it was.
Now,
So I have been to that campus before, to almost the very spot where they held the conference.
so yes, I remember that game. I remember you giving me a hard time, but it was well deserved because Wichita State was a great team that year. Clemson University. So CU, Clemson University, is what from basketball we're used to. A series of woes here lately. A couple bright spots. A couple bright spots.
That was a very good team that year.
Yes.
The Clemson team was a very good team. Afraid to play them, frankly. It just kind of went our way. So
Well, so did you any we got to talk about food just for a second.
yeah,
Did
sure.
did you eat any local cuisine that comes to mind?
I cannot verify that this was local, but there's a famous steak restaurant in Charleston called Hall's,
Yeah.
and there is also one in downtown Greenville.
Okay.
And so that's probably as much as I can tell you, since Kevin sent you a note. But we did partake in a steak, which I'd like to thank you for, Scott, because that was part of our expenses. And it was delicious. And the downtown area of Greenville has been apparently fairly recently revitalized, which, by the way, used to be the home of Furman University, and the original tower from the original campus still stands down there on the Reedy River, and it was beautiful down there. We did not get to stay much. We had a early call every morning, and of course, Kevin he's a military guy, so early to bed and early to rise, all of that. So,
Well,
but yeah, it was beautiful, and I got to tell you, this was striking to me. I heard some statistics from a group called One Spartanburg.
okay.
Inc., which is the confluence of their Chamber of Commerce, their tourism organization, and one more economic development organization. Instead of having three, they've combined them all in one, which gives them three different perspectives. A genius move in my part. Not on my part. A genius move from my point of view, because it does create efficiency, and it also gives them a multitude of viewpoints when courting new companies to come to the upstate, of which there are dozens and dozens, BMW being the most famous,
Right.
but Bosch, Michelin, Bridgestone, and I believe around 65 other companies that are located in the upstate from 35 different countries. Fascinating. So that was fascinating.
Yep.
I had to say, I literally had to say to somebody, I turned to Ben Cubitt from Transplace and said, that's not the Greenville that I used to know.
Right.
So it's really, really interesting. Greenville and Spartanburg, and now Greer, which is a little town just east of Spartanburg,
Yep.
Which has grown by 300% in the last 10 years, from 10,000 to 40,000 residents. But as the head, Alan Smith,
Right.
as Alan Smith of One Spartanburg was talking about all of the numbers, they were just amazing, and really interesting to think of the Greenville Spartanburg Metroplex as an area that is growing in such incredible influence. But at the same time, when you think about the people from Upstate International, Rob Rowan, Alex Akuli, and Brianna, whose last name I'm afraid escaped me, from AFL, I do know that. When you think about the work that those people, non-governmental organizations, as well as the governments, have put in, it is to be expected, I suppose, because they have such a great group of quality international people who are working on improving what is now all of their homes. Some of them from other states, many of them from other countries.
Yeah.
And some of them from right there at home. In fact, the mayor of Spartanburg, Jerome Rice, my newest favorite mayor, wore a blazer and a polo shirt, and was from the northern end of town.
Yeah.
A lifer, and had come from being a neighborhood kid to being a city council person to facilitating the building that we actually did this in. They call it the George, which is the George Dean Business and Economics College.
Wow. Okay.
But first of all, the George, I mean, what a cool name. Go to the George and make a left, right? I just thought that was great. But anyway, Mayor Rice was a great facilitator, and a couple of other local political leaders were great hosts for us there as well.
All right. So, man, you were taking copious notes. I feel like I was there now.
Not a one, I never take notes, but that's how impactful it was.
Clearly.
Scott. I mean, it was really that impactful. I think maybe because, in my ignorance, so unexpected for, I mean, really, if our fans around the world, who thinks of the upstate, who even knows what the upstate is of South Carolina? I was truly impressed and surprised, and at the same time, in hearing from the quality persons that we all heard from, thinking, why am I surprised, and why haven't I thought about this before? So,
well, as you probably know better than I, maybe, since you are a BMW enthusiast, when the late great Governor Carroll Campbell, one of his biggest legacies was recruiting that BMW plant to South Carolina. I want to say it was the late 80s, could have been the early 90s, but regardless, that was kind of like Georgia. You got me thinking the George now. That was kind of like Georgia landing in Kia. Kia changed not just the region, it really changed the state. Well, very similar, predated by a few years, was the BMW investment in the upstate of South Carolina. So who knows? We'll have to get the full story in a later episode. One last question before we get to some of your big panel discussions and sidebar conversations and key takeaways. I thought, if you're a House of Cards fan, and I don't know if we were talking about this. We watched it all. That final season was kind of, but
I never got there after Kevin Spacey was off. I never went back, but I've always felt like I should. So no spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay. But chapter 3 of House of Cards, they featured the Peachoid. They didn't call it that on the show, but it's in Gaffney. It's like a peach.
The big peach.
Yeah, the big peach is what. Yeah, that's what I thought. I just pulled it up on Wikipedia, and they call it the Peachoid, or the Peach, or Mr. Peach, or the Moon over Gaffney. All interesting, bunch of interesting names. Did you pass by that?
No, that is north of where I was, as I recall, and between Greenville and Spartanburg, I took side roads, dark and in the rain. Nothing like driving on windy, dark unlit roads in the rain to get you to drive the appropriate speed, and I did.
Well, that is good.
I know how that must sound crazy, but I actually did.
Well, a little trivia again. Frank Underwood, who is Kevin Spacey's character in House of Cards, it all started with, he was from Gaffney, South Carolina, and fictionally in the series. So, and that's where the Peachoid, or the Big Peach, whatever your favorite nickname is appears in that episode or in that series. So, all of that, be that as it may, Greg, let's get to the heart of the matter. That was 3 heavy duty days. You and I have had a chance to debrief a little bit before your appearance here. What are a couple things that are really sticking with you after 3 days of international discussions?
Well, so this was international affairs and international business. The two things that really stood out to me were the juxtaposition or confluence, or whatever you want to call it, of international affairs and international business. If they aren't obvious to everyone, or weren't obvious to everyone before, they should be obvious now. And I expected that. You and I talked a little bit about that, and when we were talking about the conference on some of the shows leading up to it, we talked about how exciting we thought that would be, but it was much more impactful than I ever could have known. I sat down with a leader, Kevin Cassidy from the International Labor Organization, which is an organization, obviously, that represents labor around the world. And his discussion and the international perspective that he had was truly impressive and really made me think about supply chain's impact on that. And another one of our fellow panelists was Bill Gifford, who is the head, chair, president, CEO, whatever it is, of the World Affairs Councils of America, the parent organization to Rob Rowan and his organization, the World Affairs Council of the Upstate, or Upstate World Affairs Council, I believe. So had just got back from Doha, an international forum on business and world affairs with some world leaders there, and certainly powerful influencers and business persons from all over the world.
So really quick, Greg, because based on what you're sharing here and based on our previous couple of conversations and Kevin's feedback, the mix of the quality of the attendees and the panelists and just the perspective that was represented by that was a big part of the value of the conversations, would you say?
Huge. I mean, Bill himself is an incredible influencer, lives in DC, works with the government. David Cassidy as well. We had ambassadors and former ambassadors and consuls general from many countries around the world. We had a 3-star Air Force general from Denmark who is in charge of CENTCOM's Central Task Force, which is 45 countries who are jointly combating terrorism around the world, who've joined the United States since 9/11 to battle terrorism around the world. So we talked about not just foreign affairs as diplomacy. We talked about foreign affairs as things like migration, labor, actual the possibility of conflict. Where are we with Afghanistan now? What are the military? What is the potential military impact in the South China Sea of what China and the U.S. are doing, constantly sort of rubbing elbows, right, agitating one another there.
Right.
The recent play for attention from Rocket Man, from Kim Jong-un, who launched yet another missile into the Straits of something near Japan. So he's not forgotten, while Russia, China, and Ukraine take center stage. We talked a lot about things like that, the tactical and strategic aspects of military operations and the tactics that some of these countries are undertaking, as well as the social impact and the diplomatic impact and the economic impact. And that's just the first point, is the confluence of all these things, Scott. So the second thing that I really observed was supply chain in every single discussion. Every single discussion that we had, people who knew nothing about supply chain, people who had never even heard of supply chain 2 years ago, people who admitted, when I asked the audience, their eyes glazed over whenever the topic of supply chain was brought up prior to 2020. Now it's in the forefront of everyone's mind. And even I, having been in supply chain, and you and I have, and others have advocated for supply chain to have this seat at the table. Even I was taken aback as I realized the realization that people had over the last couple of years, and the breadth of impact of supply chain on diplomacy, on economic policies, social policies, military action and policies, right?
So really quick, speaking of that, we talked months ago, and I have to go back and find the show, but you and I were talking about, I think it was a prediction show or something, maybe at the end of 2021, and we're talking about 2022. And you and I both were talking about, folks, this is largely, I mean, there's still regional conflicts and that kind of stuff, but largely, there's no large, massive scale invasion or war or conflict. And so all of these challenges in supply chain, didn't have to worry about that. Well, welcome 2022. And we're starting to see, and we're trying, and hopefully, no, number one, hopefully not only is the blatant Russian and atrocious Russian aggression in Ukraine, hopefully it comes to a stop, but also we hope it cooler heads prevail and we're able to contain it. But just think, all those places you just mentioned, of course, the South China Sea, which is not just China. To your point, you've got North Korea rattling some sabers because of lack of attention, but just
Taiwan has, which I found out at this conference, Taiwan has greatly increased their defense budget because of this, because they see that China is using Russia as somewhat of a crash test dummy to figure out how the world will respond to this kind of aggression, and probably determining their actions in Taiwan based on how the world responds and the impact that it has on Russia.
Well, with all of that, and I don't say this lightly, but gosh, if we thought, given all the potentials, if we thought it was challenging, let's kind of hold our breath a bit over the next few months, or maybe, longer than that, clearly. But, because it could go from from the skillet to the fire. Is that the
phrase? From the frying pan into the fire. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's an old Schoolhouse Rock thing.
Is it?
Out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Well, the weight of the conversations, Greg, you're always a deep thinker anyway, but man, the weight and the gravity and the truly the global nature and purview and positioning of these discussions, man, it feels palpable based on kind of what you're bringing to the audience here. What else still sticks with you?
Well, you mentioned hope and all of that around what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Let me assure you, none of these people, none of the diplomats or military leaders, they weren't hoping at all. They were planning, they were creating provisional schemes, they were predicting, estimating. They were, Bill Gifford for one, was vocally and loudly protesting, and this is a man with a significant voice, by the way, loudly protesting and decrying what Putin is doing in Ukraine. But the interesting thing is that while we, foreign affairs amateurs and observers, while we sit and hope and think and worry, many of the people that were at this conference are taking some sort of action, either diplomatic preparing for military, or military consulting with diplomatic, or overt or covert action in regard to this. So there is so much going on behind the scenes of diplomacy, and they are deeply, deeply intellectual people. If I have rarely felt outclassed, not that I'm a genius, but I have rarely felt outclassed, mostly because I stay in my lane. But I was a bit out of my lane, I must confess, at as regards foreign affairs. But I felt completely outclassed by the likes of Bill Gifford and Kevin Cassidy and others there, as we talked about it. General Henrik Larsen, from Denmark, and CENTCOM. So,
well, we're a transparent bunch. Foreign affairs, it's not my bag. I think you're saying it's not your bag either. Yeah. And it's good to know that these pros that know how to navigate through these times and hopefully help cooler heads prevail are at work. I'll tell you, Greg, a few weeks ago, not to take us off the subject, but a movie you got to see if you haven't already, on Netflix. There's this movie called Munich, The Edge of War. And it's based on a true story. Have you seen this?
I haven't, but I bet I know what it's about.
Yeah, it's in the days just prior to. It's when Neville Chamberlain visits and has the big agreement with Hitler, and it shows all these diplomatic behind the scenes. And man, according to the movie, war was just, it was so close to being averted and so close to a certain party within Germany um, kind of taking power back away from Hitler. But I'm not a historian. I'm not that's a lot of deep history there. But check it out, Munich, The Edge of War.
Yeah,
Man,
I'll do that.
Man and I watched that, and there's so many parallels to some of what we're seeing now as the non-global diplomacy expert that I am.
I have to tell you, I mean, I studied political science and particularly Soviet politics when I was in college. And I have to tell you, I do see a lot of parallels. The tactic that the English and Europeans took largely in World War II was appeasement. Let's give him something and hope he doesn't go any further. And I see some significant parallels in how we're approaching what Putin is doing. And appeasement did not work. In fact, the policy was called appeasement prior to World War II.
That's right.
And I see some significant alignment with the appeasement of World War II, and hoping that cooler heads prevail, which they are not going to. I mean, there will unquestionably be some sort of counter aggression to end or put a fine point on the end of, or the boundaries of what Putin is doing today. It may not be battle, but it will certainly be a positioning of military might that says this is your new, even if Ukraine becomes part of Russia or becomes a puppet state like Belarus, there will be a significant measure of military strength shown to assure him that that is the edge of his domain.
So I want to, I'm going to take one more stat. I bet you're still kind of processing a lot of what you heard, but also a lot of what you shared, because you were there speaking on, I believe, supply chain panels. You may have been on some tech panels. I was still trying to navigate through all 3 days worth of sessions, but
yeah,
give us one more thing that really sticks out based on what you were being asked or the expertise you were sharing or some of those conversations you were part of, kind of sidebar.
Yeah, I think that one of the sidebar conversations, a sidebar conversation that I had frequently was the freedom and openness of discussion that we had at this. There was nobody pulling any punches. If they felt strongly about Russia, they said so. If a matter of fact discussion around China or Russia or supply chain or world labor or whatever needed to be had, they said it, and nobody apologized for it. And I think it was good, because I could tell we are not all aligned necessarily politically, but we were all free to speak our mind, to say our piece, and to know that while an intellectual argument might be made, no other argument was made, and nobody was shouted down, and nobody was silenced, or whatever you call that, the thing that everybody hates.
Canceled.
Not erased. Canceled. Yes, that's it. Canceled. But I think that was really powerful. And then, in addition to that, it was just the breadth of topics. We talked about global migration. We talked about the possibility of a world minimum tax, global minimum tax, so that every country agrees to tax every business and individual to at least some minimum level. I presume, and again, like you said, I'm still processing this because that was way over my head. But to help alleviate some of the things that companies do to avoid taxes in high tax jurisdictions like the United States and the UK and Australia and others.
So to kind of level up the global playing field, I guess, would be one of the motivations there.
Mostly it's a money grab by the big countries.
Okay.
But yeah, you can call it whatever you want. Because it does, by the way, this was the one takeaway I took from, the two takeaways, I should say. One, it does, by virtue of this global minimum tax, and at least what is proposed today, it does announce by the countries that they own you, that they own their citizens, not that their citizens are free.
Wow.
people. That I had a long discussion about that at our table, and we all wound up agreeing. We didn't start out agreeing, but we all wound up agreeing that that's essentially what it said. And the other is it works to the disadvantage of some of the smaller countries that woo companies to locate there.
Ireland,
because Ireland, Cayman Islands, though it's hard to have any sympathy for the Cayman Islands, but Mauritius, other countries that have beneficial tax structures that allow these companies to legally avoid the tax structures of maybe their domicile nation or primary nation of operations. But it does work to the significant disadvantage of hundreds of companies where it benefits dozens of countries.
Wow. Okay. So folks, if you're tuned into the video version of this conversation, I apologize because the pollen is getting to me. Yes, I'm coughing, I'm drinking, I'm trying to keep everything out of the mic.
You're making me thirsty, actually.
Yeah, I tell you, this pollen is record breaking here in Georgia this year. All right. So Greg, I know that we never planned on doing it justice in 30 minutes. I'm sure we'll talk about more eureka moments and takeaways in upcoming editions of the Buzz. Love those. So as we wrap here, I want to make sure folks know how to connect with you hang on, wait a second, time out, because I want to go back to something you published today, and we're gonna wrap on this, and then we'll get folks to connect with you, because this was talk about not pulling punches. And by the way, it is beautiful and a blessed thing to have a bunch of smart people in a venue like this, and there be plenty of disagreement. That's the definition in many ways of freedom, and they can all share, and you can agree to disagree, even if it's the most passionate. It's really important that all those perspectives can assemble like that. So that's a beautiful thing. But today, so every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on LinkedIn, if you connect with Greg White or follow Greg White, you will see his commentary, supply chain commentary. And folks, he lays it out there. He doesn't pull any punches. He tells you what you need to know. He tells it to you frank and direct. And sometimes it's a smack in the face. No pun intended. I'm not even going to reference any current events. But today, Greg, was all about how you were really separating maybe a popular fiction when it comes to sanctions against Russia to reality. So really quick, let's if you can unpack that in a nutshell, because I think folks need to really understand that.
Yeah. So one of the headlines recently has been, and thankfully this has occurred, that the U.S. has suspended trade relations with Russia. That's not at all what has happened, and I'm sure that nobody meant to misinform people, but what has actually happened is that we have removed the most favored nation status of Russia, which means they are subject to tariffs and restrictions that countries which are not favored trading partners of the U.S. Iran would be a good example of that, and other often bad actors, but sometimes just not diplomatically in favor companies or countries. I keep saying companies. So the perception that could have been made in some of the unspoken language in the article was that we had cut off trade with Russia, which we have not done at all, right? What we have done is we have temporarily suspended this most favored nation status, not revoked it. And I know that a lot of thought went into whether we would suspend or revoke it, because I believe that constitutionally, or at least legally, once we've revoked it, we cannot reinstate it. So that may be why they suspended it. But the important thing to understand from that is what this pointed out to me is how we're playing chess. Our diplomats and leaders are playing chess here in the West, or checkers, sorry, and how Putin is playing chess. Because he's going to recognize the temporary nature of this thing, and he's going to continue to test our will to suffer. Because essentially what suspending trading will do is, in a number of key factors, nickel, oil, wheat, other products that we get on average around 10% of our imports from Russia, it will create a shortage of about 10% of our demand, which will, of course, raise prices in an already inflationary space. So, what this creates is some sacrifice on our parts. We're going to pay more. We're going to have less availability. It's going to hurt us as consumers. And Putin has for a long time. And again, as I said, I've studied the Soviet Union, so I know Vladimir Putin and his strategies from all the way back to the 80s. So he knows that our constituency, our citizens, can put pressure on the government and cause them to break, falter, lose favor for certain policies because it causes too much pain to the voter, and the voters are how they get elected. In Russia, it's not the same. Even though there is an election, it's a sham. And he is effectively an autocrat and dictator, and he doesn't care what his constituents think or say, protest, do, or how well they do in their livelihoods. So it's a different world for him, and he's testing our resolve with this. And I think the upshot of this, Scott, was really, and I've done a couple of posts like this, preparing myself probably and others mentally, that we need to be prepared to sacrifice for what will, in retrospect, after we're through all of this, seem like a very, very short time, but it will be very painful in the meantime. We need to prepare to sacrifice, even if it's only just prices. I'm not even talking about putting on a uniform and going to Europe or anything like that. I'm just saying endure inflation, endure shortages, accept that certain things can't or won't be able to happen because we are making a principled stand against the second most dangerous world leader on the planet. And if we don't do it against the second most dangerous world leader on the planet, Vladimir Putin, we will embolden and enable the most dangerous leader on the face of the planet, Xi Jinping of China, who is using Russia, as I said earlier, as a crash test dummy to discover how much subjugation, how much aggression, how much repression the rest of the world will endure to avoid conflict or sacrifice in their personal lives. And so that what I was really doing was calling on the citizenry to be prepared for and to accept that they will have to sacrifice to keep these two rogue, illegitimate, and dangerous leaders from attempting to overtake the world. That's the unsaid part that news organizations are not saying when they're talking about this could define the new world order, right? They are afraid to say it because they don't want to scare the citizenry, and it's appropriate because they're government agencies and they reach everyone. But I just want to reach a handful of people who reach a handful of people who can discuss this and share it in context to say, to do it without getting hysterical about it, right? And that's really the purpose and essentially the body of what I shared in my commentary today.
Well, check it out. Greg tackles some of the most challenging topics and issues and developments of our time, whether they're a little more geopolitical like today. A lot of times it's supply chain, and a lot of times it is the real story in supply chain. In fact, we should coin that title because, Greg, you do a lot of demystifying, and I enjoy that analysis. So check it out. Make sure you can, and then in the link to this on this episode page, you'll be able to connect directly with Greg. Follow Greg on LinkedIn or other social channels, and stay tuned because Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you have Greg Wright standing and delivering with reliability and consistency and plenty of challenging the current status quo. Okay, so Greg, beyond LinkedIn and Twitter, Gregory S. White, at Gregory S. White, anything else you'd suggest for how do folks connect with you?
I think LinkedIn probably the best way. I've gotten a little bit more diligent in trying to get to all the messages that I get each day and try to respond to them. If you have a question or an idea or something like that that you'd love to share, just put it in the messaging and we can connect deeper on it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. One of the best. Greg White, thanks for spending time this afternoon, right on the heels of your return from the upstate of South Carolina, where it's happening. A lot of things are happening up there.
It's amazing. It really is, and impressive. And thank you for letting me share this. It was an honor, frankly, to share time with these diplomats, people, frankly, way out of my league. But it does show you how supply chain has a seat at the table, a seat at the global table, not just the corporate table, and how important and how recognized what we do and what we do means to the world, not just to the companies that we work for or serve.
Well said. I want to wrap on one more thing, and that is, so our dear friend at Enrique Alvarez and the Vector Global Logistics team, Supply Chain Now and Vector have partnered up with plenty of other folks to really find an effective and practical way of leveraging the logistics and really the supply chain community to meet real vetted needs and targeted needs in Ukraine and Poland and elsewhere. So folks, you can learn more about that initiative. Probably the best place is just check out vectorgl.com. You'll see the Stand with Ukraine information and links, a lot more information. They're doing great work. And Greg, it is one of the best parts about this journey we're on is to rub elbows and stand with folks like that epitomize deeds, not words, and are helping folks in need. So you'll check that out, vectorgl.com. Greg White, thank you for your time here today. I look forward to the buzz coming up right around the corner. Folks, you can check that out live and bring your voice every Monday, 12 noon Eastern time on Supply Chain Now, wherever you connect with the Supply Chain Now on social. On behalf of our entire team here, this is Scott Luton and Greg White signing off for now. But hey, folks, to the Russian people and the China people, hey, continue to find your voice. You probably aren't hearing us right now because the governments don't let dissenting opinion in. But it's not about the people. It's about these really bad actors, as Greg was pointing out, that are hurting a ton of people. But whatever you do, folks, to our listeners around the world, we're imploring you to do good, to give forward, and to be the change that's needed. And on that note, we see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.